G'day everyone and welcome back to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al. I'm really excited to kick off 2026 with you. We've just finished our first full calendar year of podcasts and I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's listened, shared an episode, sent a message or stopped me for a chat. I genuinely appreciate it. This year we're aiming to bring you even more great guests with plenty of practical conversations you can take straight back to your own operation. We'll be featuring more local producers too. People right here in our region who are doing good things, having a crack, who've got great stories worth sharing. I'm also pleased to say that we've got some regular voices returning. Chelsea from Herd Solutions will be joining us on a monthly basis with veterinary updates and timely animal health advice. And Morg from Elders is back as well, committed to a monthly livestock market update to help us make sense of what's happening and what it might mean on farm. So whether you're listening in the ute, on the tractor or in the yards, welcome back. I'm glad you're here and I hope you enjoy what we've got coming in 2026. Welcome to Digging Deeper, everyone. We've got a guest from not too far away, but he's come for a little drive. So we've got Rod Manning here with us from Mansfield area. So how are you, Rod?
Yeah, good.
Now, you're actually up here for a Gippsland Ag Day on perennial pastures.
Yes.
But before we get into that, can we actually go right back to a young Rod? Where did you start? Because you actually weren't a beef producer in the early days, were you?
I did veterinary science, Melbourne Uni, and I graduated in 1972. And in 1973, I went up there as a young green vet.
Up to Mansfield straight away, did you?
Well, I was in Wangaratta for 6 or 9 months. Went to Mansfield, and set up a vet practice there. And in that stage, Mansfield was just an old traditional country timber town, sawmills, old traditional farming methods. Tourism wasn't really an issue.
Issue.
Got into obviously beef and sheep, and just sort of built a practice from there to a point where it just sort of got bigger and bigger. And
so you didn't start working at a practice there. You actually started a practice there.
Well, there was a fellow there for a couple of months, and I went in with him. And then the beef collapsed in 1975, and there was no work. So he left, went back to work for the government. I was really only kept afloat at that time by very, very little, very low cattle prices. But I had a lot of government contract work, TB testing, brucellosis testing, and spaying heifers. And that kept me afloat for 3 or 4 years. And then the beef jobs sort of picked up, and had 10 years there as a one-man practice, 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, which was sort of cut my teeth on. And then as Mansfield developed and whatever, we started to employ more vets and went from there. So when I first went there, I did buy 300 acres, all on borrowed money, basically. Nearly went bankrupt.
Right.
Beef job collapsed. Bought the first run of cattle I bought for $100, and 12 months later they were worth $380. I was told by the agent. I thought, shit, this is the way to make money. Triple our money in 12 months. Sent them to a sale at Euroa. Got offered $340, and I thought that's not enough, and I brought them home.
Right.
Kept them for another 18 months and sold them for $100. And it was the best lesson I ever had in my life.
Tough lesson, it sounds like. Yeah.
When the cattle are ready to sell, you sell them. You buy and sell on the same market, and once you start to not do that, you're going to get caught out. So it was a good lesson. Yeah.
So that was why you're doing your veterinary practice?
Yep. So, and then whenever we had a little bit of money left over, we'd just go and borrow more money, leverage onto that, and just kept growing our farm work. But I was full-time veterinary work. My wife sort of worked the farm.
Were either of you from a farming background, or?
In a way, my family's all come off the land in Western Australia, but there was no family farm, so I'd always wanted to be a farmer. Being a vet seemed like a pretty good way to get into it, so that's how I got into it, and we just sort of grew from there and kept buying land, borrow more money, and then I guess, back, I went and did a master's degree, which I never actually completed, but I started to specialise particularly in grass tetany and a lot of computer programming, and even to this day I use a lot of computer work to work out how we're going to do things. And then sort of got more interested into proper full beef production. Then I had a couple of 2 or 3 years at McKinnon Project, which is a Melbourne University consultancy program. And then I went into consultancy, and I had a range of clients from here to the Territory to the Kimberleys to New Zealand, and so I did a fair bit of travelling, looking at whole different farming enterprises.
So you were with McKinnon, but then you also did it independently as well?
Yeah,
consultancy?
Yeah. And and then just got very interested, and I suppose I went and sort of got started in an MBA, and did that for a bit, and started to really recognise or look for what the real production drivers were on farm, and we started to analyse a lot of farm economic data, and we're always interested in saying, well, what are the top 10%? Why are they consistently high profit compared to the other 80% who don't really can't survive as a full business?
Yeah.
So we sort of wanted to hone in on what the real profit drivers are on farm, and I don't think it's changed. And the bottom line, I think, still is about being about throughput, getting more cattle through the system more efficiently. And then it really wasn't until I took off my beef hat and put on my pasture hat that we recognised what was going on.
You've actually stolen me a line. I did have that coming up later on in my list of questions, so we'll get back to that. But I just want to backtrack to your veterinary days a little bit. Now, are you still practicing it all now, or do you?
No, I've retired. My kids run the farm now. We've sort of got sort of quite big now. We run about 8,000 acres of freehold, and we've leased probably another 1,000 acres there. We've probably got 2,400 autumn cows and 200 or 300 spring cows. Yeah. Spread over from Mansfield to Benalla. It's one of the. It's good in some ways. I think there's 13 or 14 farms now but they're not all contiguous. Some are quite big areas are contiguous, but some aren't. That's got its drawbacks in some ways, but it does actually spread your climate risk. It's quite amazing, over that 60-kilometre radius of which we run our farms, how much climate variation is from year to year.
Yeah, we experience it right here in East Gippsland and Gippsland. You got some really nice pockets, and then you don't have to drive far, and you're in some pretty desperate times as well. So, but it sounds like it's mainly hill country, is it? No. We're all not. I'd say 80% is beautiful red gum country. Yeah. One of the things I recognised early, that when you're young and silly, you just want to buy lots of cheap acres of shit country. We did that for a while and recognised it was very hard to make it work. Yeah. And particularly in the last 20 years, we've concentrated on buying better country. Yeah. Now, I just want to ask you a question, because I read somewhere that you can tell the production potential by looking at the trees. You want to explain that a little bit more? Well, look, my veterinary practice ran over most of northeastern Victoria, and you drive around and you go, gee, this is good-looking country and this is pretty ratty or whatever. And it became pretty apparent pretty quickly to me that what I considered good country was, or heavy carrying country, was all predominantly dominated by big red gum, Eucalyptus camelodensis tree. I don't know if you have red gum down here. Yeah, I'll show you a photo later. I just built up some red gum myself, actually. So right. I love the stuff. Yeah. So all our country is basically pretty undulating to flat, big red gum trees, beautiful old red gum trees. I should have bought some photos. So that's what we're always looking for. Yellow box is probably the next layer down. Good country, but it's not as good as the red gum country. And as soon as you get to sort of red box,
and peppermint and stuff, we wouldn't even bother to spend money in there because we know we won't get a response on it for what we do. We tend to be fairly high input to what we do to get to what we do. So, yeah, looking back, I would say when you're going to buy country, spend a bit more and buy the best of it. Yeah. I reckon.
It'll pay off.
I reckon. In the long term, yeah.
No, that's good advice. Now, back to your veterinary days. We've actually got a listener question has come in from Alison Gunn. She's actually an old, I don't know whether colleague's the right word, but you've known her from the veterinary days.
Yep.
And she said, I'll just find it here, in your time as a vet, what is one major cattle disease as you've seen effectively controlled?
One major cattle disease. I would say in northeastern Victoria, I was always very concerned about the subclinical stuff that we didn't see, which really pulled away on production. And when we started to look at it, things that we recognised were hard to recognise because they didn't actually exhibit a classical symptom, but with things like poor reproductive health, poor growth rates, ill thrift, particularly in sheep and cattle. And so when you started to look at those sort of things, selenium was a major issue that I think was overlooked. So when we started to do herd profiling and looking at that, we were finding glutathione levels of less than 10 and less than 5 in cattle herds, and they just never looked well. Once we took care of the selenium by supplementation or whatever, a lot of those immune-mediated diseases disappeared. So anything that was like either pink eye, a lot of lame cattle, mastitis, reproductive failure, particularly in heifers, once you took care of selenium and some of those, sometimes iodine in wet winters, a lot of those immune-mediated diseases just had a lot less importance.
All right, we'll just go down that track a little bit. So we got low selenium in this area fairly extensively.
Yep.
Are you an injection like a Sullivan, or do you try and get it into the soil somehow?
No, look, at the moment we're on a marginal level. Certainly, all our young cattle get Selenium. At weaning or prior to weaning. One of the issues that we run into a bit now, because when we start weaning, we might have couple of thousand calves weaned over a couple of weeks, and I think it's pretty stressful for those calves, and that's when you see outbreaks of respiratory disease and Bacillus and all that type of stuff. And so we have a big push now to mediate that stress, so we make sure that they've all got adequate selenium probably 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks prior to weaning.
Right.
And we think it's decreased the pink eye in the yards. They just do a lot better with it. That's been a major issue for us. And certainly I think we used to wean big mobs of cattle, like 12,000 calves at a time into big sets of holding yards, but we just found that definitely you were just creating a set of circumstances where you did get some of these respiratory problems and that coming up. So we, I suppose, evolving our weaning process.
Yeah, what's it look like today then?
Well, this year we sort of broke down. Most of our weaning mobs were probably 400 calves in a mob, where they used to be 800 or 900.
Yeah.
We certainly try to get them all vaccinated, everything done before they come into weaning. We make sure we've got those calves imprinted to come on to feed a lot quicker with mum. Or we might feed mum and then for 2 weeks before weaning, so the calves know how to come in and feed properly.
Just on a grass or silage or pellets as well?
A pellet silage mix.
Yeah.
And that's made a big difference. They come in, you bring them at 9 o'clock in the morning, by that evening they're all on the troughs, feeding. Before we'd initiated that stuff, they'd take 2 or 3 days of walking around the yard and boiling and whatever. So, yeah, we've been very happy with that. It's been good. Putting together all the weaner throughput on more beef from Pastures.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, which is actually just starting up another group. More beef from Pastures 2.0, I think it's called.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I set it up, MLA, when they originally setting it up, we did a lot of the research work and everything to set up the various modules, and most of my work in that was to do with weaner throughput, the failures thereof, failures to look after heifers properly, not enough recognition about the treatment of heifers in the first 15 months of their life, how it reflects on their subsequent fertility for the rest of their life. So all that sort of issue, very nutritionally based.
What were the key findings out of not looking after those heifers? Reproduction, obviously, you said.
Failure to get them to critical mating weight,
which
was a bit debatable at the time, but we sort of got that pretty well worked out at 15 months joining. Generally about nutrition, failure particularly from weaning to joining. That's where a lot of young cattle crashed, particularly in the autumn-calving systems. So how did you make sure that you facilitated and you got them all up to those weights? How did you, what the heifer retention rates would be? Like, we did surveys. I was with the McKinnon project for quite a while. And when we went looking at the age distribution through a cow herd, so many people had too many old cows in there. Like, they had an average age of 8 or 9 or 10, so which meant some of the cows were 12 and 13 and 14. Yeah. And so the real question was, how come they've got so many old cows? And it was inability to have enough heifers coming in from this end to get them up to that critical mating weight. So when you started to inquire into that, so many of those people had a joining period of 12 weeks or 16 weeks. And so, the calves that are born early in that calving period were 3 months older than these born out at this end. So when they went to start looking, how many heifers are we going to keep? They obviously just tended to take the oldest calves and could never get up to a 60, 70, 80% heifer retention rate. Yeah. Most of them are on 25, 30% retention rate, which actually makes the herd unsustainable in the long term. Yeah. So as a consequence of that, it was really about how do we shorten the joining period up from the traditional, 12 weeks or 14 weeks back to 6 weeks over the whole herd. And it's actually something that takes probably 5 years to institute that, to get that to work. I mean, if you just put the bulls in for 6 weeks... you got empties. You got too many empties out this end. So it was a matter of starting to, consolidate the joining periods down slowly, but just making sure and ensuring that all those heifers that were wanting to be in that selection process of being joined were at sufficient weight, and you had to get away all those late-born calves. Yeah, were never going to make it. So a lot of the work we did early was about how do you go about shortening up the joining periods to, and I think the standard certainly in the top herds now is a 6-week joining over the whole herd. And what sort of rates are we? Around that 90%? 92%. If you're not getting that, you've got to be asking yourself why. And generally, it will be a nutritional aspect. Failure to put enough megajoules per day in them between weaning, and up to the date of joining. And so... Now, with your operation, is a lot of that supplemented at different periods to get there, or can you do it off grass? We can do it mainly off grass. But there's certainly particular years where, we've had a failed spring or something like that, or a really tough autumn, particularly for the spring calvers. Those cattle that hit a hole, we actually introduced what we call a HACCP system across all our functions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with HACCP. No. It's hazard analysis, critical control point theory, and it's about looking through the whole production chain from woe to go, where are the critical control points that have to be met for that production chain to be completed. And for example, it might be, a good one is that the weaning weight may be whatever it is, can be anywhere from 230 to 320, depending on if you're autumn calf or a spring calf or whatever. But what is not negotiable is that 325 kilos of joining weight on the 1st of whatever May or whenever you're joining. So you need to know that is a critical control point, is non-negotiable. So at some point well prior to that, you've got to then start recording the weights from weaning up to that joining time, which is going to be 15 months. And you might look at it, say, 8-10 weeks out and say, these cattle now need to do 1.2 kilos a day to get to that critical control point. So then, knowing that then forces a corrective action. So how are we going to fix that to make sure we get to that? And we'll work out that these calves now need to get 75 megajoules a day from here to there to get to that point. Whether you've got a supplement with a high density feed or just allocate more feed away from the old girls into those calves. Young cattle are really susceptible to variations in feed.
Yeah.
The old girls, doesn't really matter what you do, they'll get in calf generally anyway within their biological constraints. So as long as they're in better than 2.5 body score, high twos, they will come back into estrus following calving. Those heifers have to be at that weight, particularly when they calve that first calved heifer. They're the ones really under pressure, trying to lactate. They've had a calf, they lactate, they're still growing, and then if you don't put enough megajoules a day or have them at the correct body score at the point of calving, you won't get them to come back into estrus by day 82, which is absolutely critically important because it's a 365-day calving interval, and if you haven't got the feed up there, instead of coming back into estrus before 82 days, it's a 274-day gestation. You've only got 82 days to get them back to maintain that calving date. And so we work everything through, and I'll probably talk about it tomorrow, about every decision now that happens on farm is reduced to how many megajoules a day do we now need to achieve that outcome. So when you actually think about it, it actually removes the risk out of everything you do. If we have to put supplementary feed in, we've worked out that they're getting 50 megajoules a day in the pasture. We need to get another 25 megajoules a day into them. We know our feed's going to cost us 4 cents a megajoule if we use, supplementary feed. It doesn't matter. We do it. The risk is removed about having a failure of that, getting that critical mating weight, which is defined as getting 85% of your heifers in calf in 2 cycles.
Yeah, go again with that one.
The critical mating weight is defined as that weight at which you have to get those heifers in at to guarantee you an 85% conception rate within 2 estrus cycles, so a 6-week joining.
Yeah.
So if you get that wrong and you only get 63% in, or something, like, it's a catastrophic financial failure.
Yeah.
And it's the same with particularly with those first calf heifers that have calved. If you haven't had them in body score high 3s at the point of calving, or not getting enough megajoules a day, like 120 megajoules a day post-calving, they will not come back into estrus until 100 days. So often the bull's been in and gone out again and they haven't fallen pregnant. The biggest failure rate generally across, a lot of preg testings that we did was that generally it was the first calf heifers on being joined for their second time were the high-risk cattle. So we can remove all that risk out by truly understanding what's driving the biological function, and it's going to be energy. It's not often protein. It's really about getting enough megajoules a day to do it. Like So we'd say a 300 kilogram heifer wanting to gain a kilo a day to get to that first target probably wants 75 megajoules a day. That first calf heifer that's calved, lactating, still growing, we need to probably get 125 up to 130 megajoules a day into her.
So 30% more.
Yeah, once they start lactating, they're really pulling a heap of energy out.
Yeah.
But once you know what those targets are, you can remove the risk.
Yeah, and the decision making out of it, isn't
Absolutely.
it? You just look at the numbers and
and that's what that HACCP, we call it HACCP. That it just we use it across every aspect of our farm, and it may be something like we're not going to go and sow a paddock unless we've got an Olsen P better than 16.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a pH better than 5.2 in calcium chloride. Whatever it is, if you haven't met those critical control points, what are you going to do to fix it? We're not going to go and spend $600 a hectare sowing down phalaris into a paddock that's not going to meet the criteria. So we now need to know we're going to have to put out 0.8 of a kilogram of P per DSE in maintenance, and if we want to shift the Olsen P by 1 unit, you've got to add another 10 kilograms of P to do that. So if I've got to bring a paddock, say a newly purchased paddock up from, let's say it's an Olsen P of 10, I'm not even going to attempt to sow it until I've got the Olsen P up to a proper level, I've got the pH up to a proper level, and we just use that as a capital cost because we know if we don't do that, the chance of failure on that sowing is going to be too high.
So do you go boots and all in the first season?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Like if we purchase new country, which we do, seem to be doing all the time, I actually call it the New Zealand method,
right?
Because I've done a lot of work in New Zealand, and the lesson that I guess I came away from there with our clients there, they'd buy country and they would just crash it. They'd be putting out 25, 30 kilograms of P in the first year, 3 to 5 tonne of lime, and they'll just call that a capital cost. And you can take it from, probably 10 DSE to 18 or 20 DSE in 2 years. Yeah. Because the whole element about everything we do on farm is about developing cash flow. So often we see people buy a paddock and then, they're under financial pressure or whatever, they just keep doing what they're always doing, or they slowly increment the soup or whatever. We would rather just bomb it, get it going, get it into full production, and then, we go from that point. So, I think so many people muck around, if you don't have NPK driving your system, you're never going to get there. So.
Now, another question from Alison, actually. What's the next lowest hanging fruit, in your opinion, in the cattle business on a veterinary side of things? What's something we need more work on?
That's a tricky one. I think the biggest issue, is the failure to understand how to allocate feed correctly across different animal classes. Mm-hmm. Like one of the things that's been very concerned, or I've given a lot of thought, we reckon around 72% of all the feed that we grow goes into maintenance of a cow herd. So you've got 1,000 cows or whatever it is going from 450 kilos to 600 kilos to 450 kilos. You're getting paid nothing for that. And in fact, the bottom line is that you should have been taking a lot of that feed that was allocated into maintenance, should have been directed into turn-off. Stuff that you're going to get heifers doing 2 kilos a day or steers doing 1.8 kilos a day or whatever. So that big fluctuating cow biomass, you're never getting paid for that. As long as you don't drop below their biological constraints in terms of, coming into estrus and calving and milking and whatever, you're not getting paid for it. So how do you control and allocate that feed better to a class of cattle that you're going to get paid for?
So you're saying we're putting a bit too much weight on...
Well, I think, so often people, you drive around and we're probably as bad as anyone. You look at, sure, these cows look great. They're all body score 4 and shiny and glossy and whatever. But we're not selling them, so we're not really getting any money out of it. How do we supply quite a lot of cattle to Coles and stuff like that now. We just take that extra feed away off them and allocate it to classes of cattle that we're going to sell. And so we can hopefully, like we had some heifers this year, we did that, and they were doing like 2.8 kilos a day.
Okay. Really humming.
We're getting paid for it, and they look fantastic. That's where you generate cash. It's cash is king, I reckon. Farming. So many farm systems you look at don't generate enough cash flow. Cash lubricates change. It allows you to move, in new directions, and whether it's to borrow more money or whatever you want to do with that cash. I mean, one of the issues that we've certainly been involved in, because we've doubled our sort of farm size every 7 to 10 years.
Right.
And I was very slow, I reckon, early on. Like, let's say you went from 400 cows to 800 cows. We didn't develop the systems along quick enough to come with us. So what worked well for 400 cows, when you sort of suddenly bought North Country and up at 800 cows, you're using a 400 cow system to run it, and everything got tough.
Yeah.
And really it wasn't until my son came home and said, we need to upgrade, and I didn't want to spend the money to buy bigger tractors and this and that. But definitely it was a major shift up. You've got to, if you're going to up the system, you've got to bring a whole system along with it to make that work.
Yeah. Just out of interest's sake, do you think there is a critical size for your beef herd per farm?
Absolutely. I reckon the problem for so many farmers now is reaching that critical mass that allows you to get over and above that sort of living hand to mouth, getting enough cash, whatever. Now, I used to say, critical mass early on, I can remember thinking it was probably 400 cows. And then I reckon now it's probably close to 1,000 cows, 800 to 1,000 cows. Once you can get to that, economy of scales really kick in. And that economy of scale allows you to just make big leaps forward. And the other thing, the most important thing, and I'll certainly talk about it tomorrow, which I think is very poorly understood by so many farmers, is about how important the price that you get for your product is what the price you get. Like, you don't have much control over that.
Yeah, we just take the price, don't we?
You take the price. What you do have fantastic control over is the cost of production. And I used to look through our clients' list and see the range of cents per kilogram of beef out the gate, and it could range anywhere from sort of good blokes, this is 3 or 4 years ago now because I've been out of it for 3 or 4 years, but they might have been at, 80 cents, and that mightn't have included finance costs. But lots of the clients are up at $1.80, $2.20. They might have only been receiving $3. $2.20 in production costs, they're only getting 80 cents a kilo. These clients down here were at 80 cents, we're making $2 net profit, like 3 times the profit level. And you've only got to look through the Southwestern Farm Monitor figures to see how true that is. So,
just on that, would you go back to your top 10% of producers? Yeah. They were all similar sort of numbers, were they?
Yeah, pretty low. Some had higher production costs than others. I used to worry, I reckon, if you allow your production costs to get too high, they could be producing a lot of product. They're probably making pretty good money at the time, but it starts to expose your business to a lot of risk, financial risk. And so, like, let's just say foot and mouth entered the country, or BSE or whatever, and the price dramatically dropped from, let's say, $5 to $2, which could happen. the only people who are going to survive that are people who had their cost of production less than $2 or whatever. So we see that cost of production as a real driver of what profit's going to come out at the end of it.
A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.